The phone rang at midnight, ripping me from sleep. I'm Felicia, 27, and that call changed everything. My twin sister stumbled into my Detroit apartment, her face pale, bruises darkening her cheek and shoulder. She was shaking, her voice barely a whisper as she clutched my arm. She threw scalding tea at me, she said, eyes wide with fear. I answered a call during work hours and she screamed, "You think you have privacy?" My fists clenched, rage mixing with dread. I knew this woman, her shadow loomed over my sister's life, a tyrant who crushed anyone who defied her. I guided my sister to the couch, checking her bruises. They weren't just marks. They were proof of a cage I hadn't seen clearly until now. Her trembling hands told me she was trapped, and the fire in my chest roared to life. I wasn't just angry, I was terrified of what this woman might do next. But one thing was certain, I'd do whatever it took to set my sister free. This wasn't just about bruises. It was about breaking a chain I didn't fully understand yet. Something bigger was coming, a reckoning I could feel in my bones. What would you do if someone you love was trapped in fear? Share your story in the comments. Have you ever fought for family, stood up in a moment that changed everything? Tell me, because this is only the beginning, and trust me, you'll want to see how this trap unfolds. To understand why I couldn't walk away, I need to tell you about us. My sister and I were inseparable, growing up two halves of the same heart. We were 10 when Mom died, a car accident that left a hole nothing could fill. Dad tried to keep us steady, but his grief was a shadow over our home in Detroit. 3 years later, he met Deborah Harris, a fashion mogul with a smile that never reached her eyes. I didn't trust her, but Dad saw a fresh start. They married within a year, and our lives shifted. Deborah moved us into her historic condo, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. She owned a clothing empire, her name on billboards across Michigan. Dad worked for her managing accounts while my sister and I navigated her world of rules. Don't touch the fabrics. Don't speak unless spoken to. I hated it, but my sister, always the softer one, tried to please her. Deborah called her sweet, but I saw the way she watched her like a hawk circling prey. When I was 17, Dad got sick. Cancer took him in months, leaving us with Deborah as our guardian. His will named her executor of the estate, a condo in Detroit, and shares in her company. I was too young to fight it, but I saw her game. She didn't want us. She wanted control. My sister, only 22, started working at Deborah's firm, a low-paying job sorting samples. I moved out, got a degree, and landed a job analyzing data, but I never stopped watching over her. Deborah's grip tightened after Dad's death. She controlled my sister's bank account, claiming it was for family expenses. Every dollar my sister earned went through her. I tried to stay close, but Deborah made it hard. Phone calls were screened. Visits were supervised. Once I sent a letter pouring out my worry, begging my sister to meet me. Deborah intercepted it. I showed up at the condo, and she held the torn pieces in her hand, smirking. "She doesn't need you," she said, her voice cold as steel. I wanted to scream, but my sister stood behind her, eyes down, silent. I started getting emails from my sister's work account, short and clipped. "I'm fine, don't worry." I knew they weren't her words. Deborah was behind them, crafting a lie to keep me away. I saved every message, searching for a crack in her facade. My job taught me to spot patterns, and I saw one. Deborah was isolating my sister, cutting her off from everyone. She claimed it was to protect the family's reputation, but I knew better. It was about power. Aunt Frances Miller, Mom's sister, tried to help. She lived an hour away in Ann Arbor, in a cozy house filled with books and warmth. I'd visit her, hoping to bring my sister along, but Deborah always had an excuse. "She's busy with work," she'd say, or "she's not feeling well." Frances saw through it too. "That woman's trouble," she told me once, her voice low. "Your sister's caught in her web." I nodded, but I didn't know how to break her free. Years passed, and the distance between my sister and me grew. I'd lie awake replaying memories of us as kids, laughing in the backyard, sharing secrets under the covers. She was my mirror, my other half. Losing her to Deborah felt like losing myself. I kept digging, tracking Deborah's moves through public records and company filings. She was ruthless, firing employees who crossed her, suing rivals without mercy. My sister was no match for her. 2 years ago, I got a chance to see her at a company event. I drove to the venue, heart pounding. She looked thinner, her smile forced. Deborah stood nearby, her hand on my sister's shoulder, a warning. I tried to talk, but Deborah cut in, steering her away. "Family business," she said, dismissing me. I left, fury burning in my chest. I knew then that Deborah wasn't just controlling her life, she was breaking her. That night in my apartment, after my sister showed up, bruised, those memories flooded back. Every email, every torn letter, every missed chance to pull her out. I couldn't let Deborah win. My sister deserved more than a life under her thumb. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had something stronger. The promise I made to myself as a kid, to always protect her. No matter what it took, I'd bring her back. My suspicions started to solidify 6 months ago. I'd been trying to reach my sister, but her replies were ghosts, short, empty, not her. She stopped meeting friends, her social media went silent. Once I spotted her name on a community event list, but when I called, the woman answered. "She's busy," Deborah said, her voice sharp. "Don't bother her." I hung up, my stomach twisting. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started watching closer. My sister's emails, those curt, "I'm fine" notes, came only from her work account. She'd never been one to dodge plans, but now she did, always with an excuse. "Work's hectic," she'd write, or "I'm tired." I'd see her checking her phone constantly in old photos, her eyes darting like she was waiting for a reprimand. I tried calling her personal number, but it went to voicemail. Then one day, Deborah picked up instead. "She doesn't need distraction," she snapped, and the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse racing. This wasn't just control, it was a lockdown. I needed to see her to know the truth. The Eastern Market in Detroit was my chance, a bustling spot where she shopped for vegetables every Saturday. I drove the 15 minutes from my apartment, my hands tight on the wheel. The market was alive with vendors and chatter, but I found her near a stall, her head down, a basket in hand. She looked thinner, her posture hunched. I called her name softly, and she froze, her hand jerking to her sleeve, pulling it over her neck. My heart sank. She was hiding something. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. "Hey, it's me," I said, forcing a smile. Her eyes flicked up wide with panic, then softened. "Oh, you're here," she mumbled, but her hands trembled. Before I could say more, her phone buzzed. She flinched, answering it instantly. "Yes, I'm just buying vegetables," she said, her voice small. "No, I'm alone." I caught the edge in the caller's tone, sharp and commanding. It was her. My sister hung up her fingers, clutching the phone like a lifeline. When she turned back, I saw it, a red mark on her neck, raw, like a chain had dug into her skin. It wasn't a bruise, not like the ones I'd seen that night in my apartment. This was different, deliberate. "What's that?" I asked, pointing. She yanked her sleeve higher, her face pale. "It's nothing," she said too fast. "Just a scratch." But her eyes betrayed her, darting away, filled with shame. I wanted to grab her, pull her out of there, but I knew she'd run. She was scared, not just of Deborah, but of what might happen if she fought back. I pressed gently, asking about work, about home. She gave short answers, her voice flat. "Everything's fine," she said, but it sounded rehearsed. I noticed her glance at a nearby security camera, one of those small ones businesses use. It wasn't the market's, it had a logo, the same one on her company badge. My blood ran cold. Deborah wasn't just watching her at home. She was tracking her at work, maybe everywhere. That camera explained her fear, her constant checking, her hunched shoulders. I tried to keep her talking, but she cut me off. "I have to go," she said, her voice urgent. "She'll know if I'm late." She grabbed her basket and slipped into the crowd, leaving me standing there, my mind racing. I drove home, replaying every detail, the mark, the camera, her trembling voice. I pulled up my laptop and searched the company's public records. Buried in a vendor contract, I found a purchase order for surveillance equipment signed by Deborah Harris. She'd installed cameras in the office, maybe even on my sister's desk. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a system, a cage built to keep her in line. That night I couldn't sleep. The red mark on her neck haunted me, a warning of something worse than I'd imagined. I thought back to Aunt Frances's words about Deborah's web. This wasn't just about money or reputation anymore. The woman was breaking my sister piece by piece, and I'd missed the signs for too long. I opened my notebook, jotting down every clue: the emails, the phone calls, the camera. I didn't have proof yet, but I had enough to know she was in danger. I had to act to find a way to get her out, before Deborah's control turned into something even darker. When my sister confessed the truth, I knew I had to act. The morning after she showed up at my apartment, we sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She spoke in whispers, her eyes darting to the door. "She hits me for anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Misplacing a file, talking too long on a break. She says she'll ruin me, take everything." I leaned forward, my jaw tight. She described an app on her phone, one that tracked her every move, sending alerts to Deborah if she strayed from approved routes. "She checks it all the time," my sister added, her fingers trembling. I felt sick realizing how deep the woman's control ran. I couldn't just pull her out, she'd be hunted down, her life dismantled. We needed proof, something undeniable to expose Deborah's abuse. An idea sparked, risky but possible. "What if I took your place?" I said, my voice steady despite the wildness of it. "We're twins. I could pretend to be you. Get close, record her threats." My sister's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. "She'll know," she whispered. "She notices everything." I reached for her hand, promising I'd keep her safe. After a long pause, she nodded, her trust in me outweighing her terror. I needed help to pull this off. I called Teresa Carter, my college friend, a lawyer and investigative journalist who'd exposed corruption before. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with concern when I explained the situation. "We need to be smart," Teresa said. "Deborah's cunning, she'll spot a fake if we're sloppy." We met at a diner in Detroit, away from prying eyes. Teresa laid out a plan. We'd convince the woman my sister was attending a mandatory therapy retreat in Grand Rapids, a 2-hour drive from Detroit. In reality, my sister would hide at Aunt Frances's house in Ann Arbor, an hour away, safe from Deborah's reach. Teresa's connections made it believable. She drafted a letter from a fake therapist, complete with a forged letterhead, stating my sister needed intensive sessions for work-related stress. She even arranged a burner phone to send fake location pings to the tracking app, making it seem like my sister was in Grand Rapids. I was impressed, but Teresa waved it off. "I've dealt with worse," she said, her eyes glinting with determination. We agreed Aunt Frances would keep my sister out of sight. Her Ann Arbor home, a quiet refuge. Frances had always been our anchor, and when I called, she didn't hesitate. "Bring her to me," she said, her voice warm but firm. With my sister's escape covered, I focused on becoming her. We spent hours in my apartment, her teaching me the small things Deborah scrutinized. The way she tilted her head when nervous, the soft cadence of her voice under pressure. I practiced her signature, looping the letters just right, mimicking her handwriting from old notes. My sister handed me her old laptop, a clunky thing she'd used at work before Deborah replaced it. "There might be something on it," she said, her voice hopeful. I plugged it in, my data analysis skills kicking in. The hard drive held emails, schedules, even a few locked files I'd need time to crack. I backed it all up to a USB, knowing every byte could be a weapon against the woman. Teresa and I worked on the recording plan. She gave me a discreet app for my phone, one that could capture audio without lighting up the screen. "Get her talking," Teresa instructed. "Angry, unfiltered. That's what we need for a conviction." I nodded, my stomach churning at the thought of facing Deborah as my sister. We tested the app, my voice coming through clear in the playback. I memorized my sister's work routines: arrive at 8, sort fabrics by 10, lunch at noon, sharp. Any deviation, and Deborah would pounce. The final step was getting my sister out. Teresa drove her to Ann Arbor at dawn, the burner phone already pinging from Grand Rapids. I watched them leave, my heart pounding. My sister hugged me, her grip tight. "Be careful," she whispered. I nodded, promising I'd bring her freedom. Alone in my apartment, I dyed my hair to match hers, a subtle shade lighter than mine. I slipped on her work badge, her jacket, her nervous smile. The mirror showed her face, but my resolve. I was ready to step into the trap to turn Deborah's game against her. Stepping into Deborah's condo, I felt like a prisoner. The historic building in Detroit, with its polished floors and heavy curtains, was a cage dressed in luxury. I wore my sister's clothes, her badge clipped to my blouse, her nervous smile plastered on my face. For 3 days, I lived as her, every move calculated to avoid the woman's wrath. Deborah's rules were ironclad, her eyes always watching. I wasn't just playing a role, I was walking a tightrope. My days started at dawn. Deborah demanded I sort fabric samples in her home office, a task that took hours. I stood arranging swatches by color and texture, my legs aching. One morning, I placed a silk square in the wrong pile. She loomed over me, her voice cutting. "My Tracy has to be better than that," she said, her lips curling. I mumbled an apology, forcing my voice to quiver like my sister's. She stared, her gaze boring into me, then turned away. My pulse hammered. I couldn't afford a single slip. At night, the control tightened. My phone buzzed with a message from her. "The tracking app shows you weren't in your room at 9:32. Explain." I froze, realizing I'd stepped into the hallway to adjust my posture, mimicking my sister's slouch. I typed back, I was grabbing water, my fingers shaking. Her reply was instant: "Next time ask." I sank onto the bed, my chest tight. She wasn't just monitoring my sister, she was chaining her every second. The worst came when I found the camera. On my second night, I noticed a faint red light in the corner of my sister's room, hidden behind a framed photo. It was small, wired to blend with the decor, but unmistakable. My stomach churned. Deborah wasn't satisfied with the app. She had eyes in the walls. I forced myself to act normal, brushing my hair, folding clothes, anything to avoid suspicion. But the lens felt like her stare, relentless, stripping away my courage. Deborah's scrutiny grew sharper. On the 4th day, I answered a question about a fabric shipment too quickly, my tone steady instead of timid. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "You sound different," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. My heart slammed against my ribs. I coughed, softening my words. "I'm just tired," I said, dropping my gaze like my sister would. She watched me for a long moment, then nodded, but the doubt lingered in her expression. I cursed myself silently. My acting had to be flawless, or the whole plan would collapse. To survive, I leaned into my sister's habits. I memorized her routines: breakfast at 7, emails by 8, no personal calls. I practiced her hesitations, the way she paused before speaking as if expecting a reprimand. Deborah tested me constantly, firing questions about past work tasks or family events. I answered carefully, drawing on my sister's stories, my data analyst brain cataloging every detail. But each interaction was a minefield. Once I nearly signed my own name on a delivery form, catching myself just in time. My hand shook as I scratched out the mistake, Deborah's shadow over my shoulder. The pressure was suffocating, but I couldn't stop. I was there to gather evidence to turn Deborah's cruelty against her. Every night I whispered updates into the recording app Teresa gave me, hiding the phone under my pillow. I described the fabric, sorting the messages, the camera, my voice barely audible. I knew it wasn't enough yet. Teresa needed something concrete, a confession. But the longer I stayed, the more I understood my sister's fear. This wasn't a home. It was a battlefield, every moment a fight to stay unseen. By the 5th day, I was fraying. Deborah's suspicion hadn't faded. She started hovering closer, commenting on my posture, my word choices. "Tracy doesn't slouch like that," she said once, her tone icy. I adjusted instantly, my muscles screaming from the effort to mimic my sister's defeated stance. My mind raced, replaying Teresa's advice: stay calm, stay hidden. But the camera's red light blinked in my peripheral vision, a constant reminder that one wrong move could ruin everything. I clung to the thought of my sister safe, with Aunt Frances, her freedom depending on my success. I wasn't just fighting for proof anymore. I was fighting to keep my sister's spirit alive, to prove Deborah's control could be broken. Each day I felt her fear seeping into me, but I pushed it down, replacing it with resolve. I had to stay sharp to outsmart the woman before she unraveled me. The trap was set, but I was the one walking its edges, one step from falling. On the third night, I slipped into Deborah's study. The condo was silent, the air heavy with her presence even in sleep. I'd waited hours listening for her steady breathing through the bedroom door. My sister's badge hung around my neck, a fragile shield as I crept across the polished floor. The study was a fortress: locked drawers, neatly stacked files, a sleek laptop on the desk. I pulled the USB from my pocket, my hands steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. This was my chance to unravel her secrets. I powered on the laptop, the screen's glow harsh in the dark. The password was a hurdle, but my sister had shared enough: her old work codes, her habits. I typed a variation of her employee ID, holding my breath. The desktop unlocked, revealing folders labeled with cold precision. One caught my eye: Tracy Records. I clicked, and my stomach twisted. Photos of my sister filled the screen, her at work, in the condo, even sleeping. There were audio clips, her voice trembling in recorded conversations, and screenshots of threatening texts. "Disobey again, and you'll lose everything." My hands shook as I copied the folder to the USB, the progress bar agonizingly slow. A creak from the hallway stopped my heart. I froze, the USB still plugged in, as Deborah's footsteps shuffled closer. I yanked the drive out, shutting the laptop just as the door swung open. She stood there, her silhouette sharp against the dim light. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. I forced my sister's timid tone, stammering, I was checking a work email." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the desk. I clutched the USB in my fist, praying she wouldn't notice. After a tense moment, she muttered, "Go to bed," and turned away. I exhaled, my legs weak, but I'd escaped for now. Back in my sister's room, I tackled the tracking app. I'd memorized its interface from her descriptions, a program that logged her every move. Using a workaround Teresa had taught me, I disabled it for 30 minutes, giving me a window to move freely. I tested it, stepping into the hallway without triggering an alert. The freedom was fleeting, but it was enough. I needed more than files. I needed Deborah's own words, raw and undeniable. The next morning, I set my phone to record the app hidden behind a fake screen. Deborah was in a foul mood, pacing the office as I sorted invoices. She snapped about a delayed shipment, her voice rising. "You think you can betray me?" she shouted, slamming a folder onto the desk. "I made you, and I can break you." I kept my head down, my sister's nervous nod in place, but my heart raced. The app was catching every word. She ranted for 10 minutes, her threats explicit. Ruin my sister's reputation, drain her accounts. When she stormed out, I stopped the recording, my hands trembling with the weight of what I'd captured. I met Teresa at a coffee shop 20 minutes from the condo, slipping her the USB and the audio file. She listened through earbuds, her face grim. "This is damning," she said, "but it's not enough for a conviction. We need her to admit it publicly, where she can't deny it." She suggested the company's upcoming fashion launch, a high-profile event with media and investors. "Play the recording there," she urged. "It'll force her hand." The idea was bold, but risky. If Deborah suspected me, she'd destroy us both. I nodded, my resolve hardening. This was for my sister. Teresa and I planned the execution. The event was in 2 days, held at a downtown Detroit venue. I'd pose as my sister, working the guest list to blend in. Teresa would infiltrate as a journalist, ensuring the audio system was accessible. We'd override the presentation with the recording, letting Deborah's voice echo through the crowd. I memorized the venue's layout from online blueprints, noting exits in case things went south. Teresa arranged to back up a live stream to a news outlet if security intervened. She won't walk away clean, Teresa promised, her eyes fierce. Back at the condo, I prepared for the gamble. I rehearsed my sister's mannerisms, perfecting her hesitant smile, her soft apologies. I hid the USB in a seam of my sister's jacket, a precaution if Deborah searched her room. The camera in the corner blinked, a constant threat, but I moved carefully, avoiding its gaze. Deborah's suspicion hadn't faded. She watched me closer, her comments sharper. "You're too quiet today," she said once, her tone probing. I mumbled an excuse, my pulse spiking, knowing one misstep could unravel everything. The weight of the plan pressed on me. I wasn't just risking exposure, I was risking my sister's future, Aunt Frances's safety, Teresa's career. If Deborah caught me before the event, her retaliation would be merciless. I thought of my sister hiding in Ann Arbor, her trust in me absolute. I couldn't fail her. Late at night, I whispered into the recording app, documenting every threat, every moment of Deborah's control. The files were my lifeline, but the launch was the battlefield. I had to be ready to face her, to turn her own words into the trap that would free my sister. At Deborah's fashion launch, everything exploded. The downtown Detroit Convention Center buzzed with investors, designers, and reporters, their chatter drowned by pulsing music. I stood backstage, still posing as my sister, her badge pinned to my dress, my heart pounding. The USB with the recording was in my pocket, its weight, a reminder of the risk. Teresa, disguised as a journalist, nodded from the sound booth, her camera ready. The plan was simple but brutal: play Deborah's own words for the world to hear. The show began, models strutting down the runway in sharp fabrics. Deborah stood at the podium, her smile polished, her voice commanding as she praised her brand. I waited, my fingers brushing the USB, counting the seconds. Teresa signaled now. I slipped into the control room, my sister's nervous gait in place, and handed the drive to the tech, a contact Teresa had secured. "Play this after her speech," I whispered. He nodded, unaware of the bomb I'd just armed. Deborah's speech ended to applause. The lights dimmed for the finale, and I held my breath. The speakers crackled, and her voice, raw, venomous, filled the hall. "I own you, Tracy. No one can save you." The crowd froze, murmurs rippling through the seats. The recording continued, her threats echoing. "Disobey, and I'll ruin your life." Faces turned, eyes wide, as the truth stripped her bare. I watched from the shadows, my pulse racing as Deborah's composure shattered. She lunged for the microphone, her face pale. "You traitor!" she screamed, her voice shaking. "You dared record me." The crowd gasped, her words a confession louder than the audio itself. I stepped forward, my sister's timid mask gone, and met her gaze. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice steady. "You just confessed." Her eyes widened, realization hitting like a blade. The room was silent, every eye on her as Teresa's camera captured it, all the red light steady. Deborah stammered, her hands flailing. "It's a lie," she shouted, but the crowd wasn't hers anymore. Reporters scribbled, investors whispered, and the air thickened with judgment. Teresa moved swiftly, signaling security while dialing the police on her burner phone. I stood my ground, the weight of my sister's pain fueling me. Deborah's gaze locked on me, her fury palpable. "You'll pay for this," she hissed, but her power was crumbling, her threats hollow. Officers entered through the side doors, their radios crackling. Teresa handed them a file, printouts of the texts, photos from the USB, and a summary of the recording. "She's been abusing her employee," Teresa said, her voice calm but firm. "This is evidence." Deborah tried to bolt, shoving past a guard, but they caught her arm. "This is a mistake," she yelled, her polished facade gone, replaced by desperation. The cuffs clicked around her wrists, and the crowd watched, stunned, as she was led out. I exhaled, my legs trembling, the victory bittersweet. The hall buzzed with chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. Teresa pulled me aside, her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said, her eyes fierce with pride. "She's done." I nodded, but my thoughts were with my sister, safe in Ann Arbor, unaware of this moment. I'd won a battle, but her scars remained, and the road ahead was long. As the crowd dispersed, I slipped out a side exit, the city's lights blurring around me. Deborah's arrest was justice, but it wasn't closure. My sister needed time, healing a life free from fear. I'd risked everything to give her that chance, but the weight of her trauma lingered in my chest. I walked toward my car, the USB still in my pocket, a symbol of the fight I'd carried for her. The war wasn't over, but tonight, we'd struck a blow. 1 month later, the trial changed everything. The Detroit courthouse was stark, its wooden benches filled with reporters and onlookers. Deborah sat at the defendant's table, her once impeccable suit replaced by a plain blouse, her face hollow. The judge read the verdict, guilty of coercion and assault. Her company was liquidated, her name erased from the fashion world. I stood beside my sister in the gallery, her hand gripping mine. When the woman's eyes met ours, filled with spite, my sister raised her chin, her gaze steady, fearless. That moment was worth more than any sentence. After the gavel fell, we left the courthouse, the autumn air sharp against our skin. My sister didn't speak, but her shoulders were lighter, her steps firmer. She'd started therapy, reclaiming pieces of herself Deborah had tried to break. A week later, she returned to her old job working with children at a community center in Detroit. I visited her there, watching her laugh as she helped a girl paint a mural. Her smile, bright and unburdened, was a victory no courtroom could grant. She was rebuilding, not just surviving, and that was enough for now. I drove to Ann Arbor to see Aunt Frances, my sister joining me for a quiet dinner at her cozy home. The table was set with her favorite dishes, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and warm apple pie. We sat close, the warmth of the meal wrapping around us like a shield. My sister spoke of her plans, maybe teaching art, maybe traveling somewhere new. Aunt Frances listened, her eyes soft, and squeezed her hand. "You're free to choose now," she said, her voice steady. I nodded, my heart full, knowing we'd carried each other through the storm. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my journal, the pages worn from months of worry. I wrote, my pen moving with a clarity I hadn't felt before. It wasn't justice, but my sister standing tall that eased my heart. The words anchored me, a reminder of why I'd fought. Deborah was gone, her influence severed like a cut thread. There'd be no reconciliation, no final words. She'd lost her power, and we'd chosen to move forward without her shadow. My sister's strength, not the law, was the true resolution. The weeks that followed were gentle, a slow healing. I returned to my data analysis work, finding comfort in the numbers' predictability. But my thoughts often drifted to my sister, to the children she taught, to the life she was carving out. We talked often, our calls filled with small joys, a new art project, a funny story from Aunt Frances. The fear that once choked us was fading, replaced by a quiet hope. We weren't the same people we'd been, but we were closer, bound by a love that had outlasted pain. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the city lights sprawling below. I thought of the lesson we'd learned, one I'd carry forever. Not everyone who shares your face shares your heart, but we chose love over fear. My sister and I, twins in appearance, had walked different paths, but our bond had held firm. We'd faced a woman who thrived on control, and instead of breaking, we'd built something stronger. That was our triumph. Not the fall of an empire, but the rise of two sisters who refused to be defined by another's cruelty.